Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of Behind the Curtain for Absolute Intense Wrestling. My guest here today is Tim Donst, the current Absolute Champion of AIW. Now, Tim, the purpose of these Behind the Curtains, we know what you can do in the ring. We've seen your moves, we've seen your victories, but we want to know what makes up the man that is Tim Donst. Now, my first question for you is, what was it that made you fall in love with professional wrestling?
I think I really started to watch wrestling maybe 7th or 8th grade, and the very first vivid memory I remember is something with Angle, Lex Luger, and Chris Jericho versus, I want to say, Viscera on Sunday Night Heat.
Okay. From that dawning...
Not the same match, obviously, but...
The dawning of your love of professional wrestling, where did that lead you to get trained for professional wrestling?
Well, it was a combination of that and actually the N64 WCW versus NWO games I was very into before I started watching it on TV. But eventually that led me to a autograph signing when I was 16 years old that Edge was at, and I asked him about training. There's 2 schools I could go to, WXW in Allentown, the Chicago Wrestle Factory. He talked about pros and cons with both, but apparently knew Mike Quackenbush from years prior, so he suggested that one in a way, and I suggested as well, as I got trained by him, Skida, as well as Chris Hero, and eventually Claudio Castagnoli too.
As you started your young career, did one of those gentlemen or someone else kind of take you under their wing, say this is what you're doing wrong, this is how you should act in the locker room, anything like that?
Yeah, you know, I try to be as open-minded as possible. Like, I'm a big believer that everybody is better at something than somebody else. So, everyone I can learn something from. So I think I've been lucky enough to keep myself open-minded to get information from here and here and here. The first guy really, I think, was Jimmy Rave. He kind of took me aside once or twice and kind of smarted me up a bit. So, but yeah, basically I learned from everyone who let me learn from them.
Take us into your very first professional wrestling match. Do you remember where it was, who it was against?
I do. It was in the famous ECW Arena in Philadelphia, of course, and it was myself, Team Stranglehold, believe it or not, of Drew Gulak, Andy Sumner, versus Neo Solar Temple, which at the time consisted of Crossbones, Hydra, and Ultramantis Black.
Okay. Anything particular stand out in that match, or was it a train wreck?
How awful I was, maybe.
Okay.
Maybe that was. I remember being kind of overwhelmed changing in the back because, of course, the same locker room that I was putting on my wrestling shoes was the same place that RVD and Austin and all these other guys had gone through. So to me, I felt really overwhelmed.
After your first professional match, can you tell us about some of the other promotions that you tested your waters in?
Yeah, sure. Immediately after my match with actually Eddie Kingston, I started working in California for Epic War when I was 19 years old, so that was cool. I was going out there at a really young age. Eventually I moved to Cincinnati, Ohio, where I kind of started wrestling with HWA, which was a big part of my career because all of a sudden I went from wrestling once or twice a week to wrestling 4 to 5 times in all the little spot shows. And that was a really great learning experience too. And then eventually that led me to AIW, obviously, because it's in close proximity to Cincinnati. And then just keep everywhere else. Tons of other places too.
Now, going back to HWA for a second, HWA has long been known as a training ground for, the future stars of professional wrestling. Was there anybody that came through there during your time there in HWA that really you learned a lot from, or was really excited to work with?
Well, I was really lucky to be in a locker room with guys like Irish Airborne, John Moxley, week to week, and of course BJ Whitmer too. So because we were wrestling in these really small venues in front of anywhere between 8 to 12 people, obviously there's a lot of downtime to talk, and being so far out of the area, because I'm born on the East Coast obviously, and raised, you really get close with people, and that's how you learn too, so it really helped me out a ton.
Tell us a little bit about your time in Chikara.
Yeah, I mean, I've been wrestling there, I guess, for now 5.5 years. I've been lucky enough to wrestle Quack and Claudio, Brian Danielson I wrestled there, and tons of other guys, Hollow Wicked.
As you're working for Chikara and you're doing some work down in HWA, tell us a little bit about how you heard about AIW.
Yeah, well, AIW actually was doing a Jack of Trios, I believe is what it was called. Which, of course, the winner, I think, led to the King of Trios tournament, which at the time, I want to say it was Team Oreo, perhaps, won that. So I think that was the first match I actually wrestled on a card here, and it was myself, Pinky Sanchez, versus Matt Classic, and one Sugar Dokuta.
That was the Chikara Showcase match, okay.
Yep.
Now, before that matchup, had you heard a lot about AIW, or?
Yeah, here and there, like especially like being so close to Cincinnati. I mean, I think the Midwest in general is lucky enough to have a lot of cool little clicky wrestling promotions, and certainly people kind of go back and forth, but ultimately, to me, 3 hours is very close proximity, 3-4 hours. But for whatever reason, I think that both promotions kind of stayed away from each other.
Okay. Now, we've seen you rise through the ranks. You know, your performances in the Invitational that we're not allowed to say the name of. You know, going on through the Gauntlet for the Gold. We've seen the rise of Tim Donst throughout AIW. Tell us how, from just getting in that Chikara Showcase match to now the Absolute Heavyweight Champion, tell us your rise through the ranks.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of my very other first matches here in AIW, which I think I've been here for a little bit longer than a year, so definitely flew by. It was against Johnny Gargano, and of course I'd end up wrestling him tons of times and teaming with him, so he became a focal point of my time here in AIW. Of course, I've been in the ring with BJ Whitmer a few times. I think we each won one match. And tonight, of course, I get to team with Eddie Kingston, who I have a little bit of a history with, you could say.
Okay. You're the current AIW Absolute Champion. Is there someone that you would love for AIW, your dream opponent here at AIW?
Anybody that's better than me, which quite frankly, there's a ton of people right now in my opinion, because I think I've gotten to that point that I can be confident finally in my promo and my ring work. But if there is somebody, if there's a bigger star than me, I would love to beat them and take some of that name with me.
Well, Tim, we've seen you in hardcore battles with Madman Pondo. We've seen you in technical classics with Johnny Gargano. We've seen you in every style possible, from the Chikara style, Lucha Libre. What is the one match, if fans could go on to YouTube or AIWrestling.com, this is the match you need to see to know what Tim Donst is about?
I would say, personally, that Pondo match. I mean, I think because of my Chikara background, very few people have ever seen me in a hardcore type environment. And if you're going to have a hardcore match, of course, you want to be in there with a guy like Madman Pondo who knows his way around an arsenal of weapons and everything else. So I'll definitely check that one out.
You sit atop AIW as the Absolute Champion. What does the future hold in AIW for Tim Donst?
What I'd like to do is put on some of the best matches this company's ever seen. I think the fans deserve it. I'm always overwhelmed by the response. I think it's really cool that they do follow Chikara and they've heard rumblings of some of my other work. But I can definitely raise the bar even higher here, and I'd like that chance to do so.
Well, Tim, I know that the fans love having you here in AIW, as we all do love having you here in AIW, especially as our standard bearer, as champion. So, Tim, best of luck to you in the future. Thank you for joining us behind the curtain.
Thank you, Hubert, if you want to get a shot of
Hubert behind Eddie Kingston's life mentor. Yes, Hubert is still with us. Thank you, Tim Donst. Oh, no.